Hello, everyone. I'm hanging out with Trish Regan. Welcome to our little creators hangout here at Locals. How are you
Pretty
doing
neat.
today? Yeah,
Good
it's
to see
cool.
you, Bridget.
Nice to meet you as well. I really want to hear about you and what you're doing first. Let's tell the audience about you a little bit, and then we'll get into talking about what you're doing on Locals.
Okay, well, I'm a longtime journalist covering economics and politics, and the last couple of years have been really, really exciting. I went on my own. I started my own news site, trishintel.com. I started my own podcast, The Trish Regan Show, and it's been fantastic. Like, I got to tell you, the response has been great from viewers, from listeners. And for the first time in my career, and look, I've been doing this for like a long time. I started like right out of school. And so I've been doing it a good long time. For the first time, I'm completely autonomous on my own. And I got to tell you, I love it.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So when you came out of school and started working in journalism, what was it, local journalism, or what were you doing?
Yeah, no, I like start right at the top.
Okay.
I'm kidding. I basically look,
Some people do.
I paid my dues. I actually had a background in finance. So when I was in school, I was working at a pretty well-known investment bank called Goldman Sachs.
Never heard
And
of
when
it.
I was at Goldman, I thought, this is what I'm going to do. Oh, well, let me back up, Bridget, because like it gets even weirder. I started off as a young person wanting to be an opera singer.
Wow.
Yeah. So I learned to speak a lot of languages. I learned a lot of music. I sang a lot. And to this day, I'm like, you know what? This is pretty easy because all I have to do is talk. Like, there's no singing involved. But anyway, although these days it sometimes feels almost operatic in terms of the news cycle. But I would say, Bridget, so I started like as a really young person, really interested in classical music. And I went down that path. I went to New England Conservatory. I was studying music. And like at some point I woke up and was like, oh yeah, like I'm gonna have to pay the bills. Right? Like, I don't know, is this like starving artist thing is really going to be what I'm cut out for.
Yeah.
And I just remember sitting down. I had an economist uncle. I still do. He's been a big influence in my life, and he taught me a word that I will never forget, and that's opportunity cost. And he said, look, if you spend the next 10, 20 years pursuing this opera thing, and hopefully it all goes great, but just know that those are years you can never get back. And so I started to think about it. I'm like, do I really love it? Do I love it enough to give up everything that you give up? And I decided, no, I didn't, and wound up going back to school to Columbia University. Had no idea what I was going to study. Started off as an economics major, but then I was like, whoo, I got my first calculus grade back. And I was like, okay, how much economics can I do without studying math? So I was there as an economics, then history major, US history. And I went to work at Goldman Sachs. I actually worked for for a hedge fund as well along the way, and liked it, kind of liked it. I mean, at Goldman, I was responsible for collecting a whole bunch of research on Latin American economies and their political systems, and trying to help decipher that into the biggest news items of the day so that we could put a note together for clients. And so I was going to do that after, that was like my calling, right? I started there. They offered me a full-time job after graduation. And I said, well, like, I like it, but, maybe again, I was still searching for something. And I somehow came around to news. My mom had been a reporter for the Boston Globe years ago. So like, I was sort of familiar with that. And I thought, maybe television news, right? Like, because I could use all my expertise in finance. I could use the sort of performing ability I had acquired along the way. And I loved taking complicated subjects and trying to make them understandable and easy and decipherable to people. And so I wound up saying, okay, you know what? I'm going to pursue financial news. So I was lucky. My first job out of school in the news arena was actually at Bloomberg Television. And it was back when Bloomberg was first starting to get going. And it was like, I didn't start in local news. It was international, right? I mean, we had viewers from all over the world. But to this day, I'm convinced the only reason I got the job was because I was the first person who ever applied who knew how to work the Bloomberg terminal, which is like the lifeblood of that company. So that was thanks to the financial stuff.
Wow, that's such a crazy and interesting path, though. What's funny is that you were talking about not taking the path of the, starving artist, which I've been on for many decades, and it's not an easy path, but being an independent creator, it's kind of like you've come full circle. I mean, there's a lot of freedom in it, but it still is in some ways you're not the starving artist, but there is that kind of lack of security that you might not have from working at a traditional job, although I think there's not really security there either. But
no, I think that's really true. But, I tell every young person that talks to me about, they want to go and work in a network and can I help them? And I'm like, sure, I can help. But do you really want to do that? Because the media industry is changing so quickly. And I wish I knew like 20 years ago what I know now, right?
Yeah.
Like I never even used to take social media that seriously. Somehow,
Yeah.
I built up a following over the years, but never ever took it seriously. Didn't really understand it. Used to kind of think YouTube was like some funny thing that like kids did on summer
Yeah.
vacations. And what I've learned is this is the future. Like the networks and the traditional media, that is very much in the past. And so I think as you try and forge a career ahead, like everything's different, right? Nowadays, everybody's kind of learning to make a go of it on their own. But with all these technological changes, there's huge opportunity. And so if you really want to do this, I tell people all the time, go and get some experience, but don't waste too many years there, because there's a lot that you want to try and do on your own.
Yeah.
As scary as it is.
It is scary. And I don't know that everybody is cut out for it either, in terms of a lot of people might want to be independent and think it's easier, but in many ways, I think it's harder. And some people like to just have the 9 to 5, knowing when their day begins and when their day ends. I don't have that. I went to a doctor appointment yesterday and she's like, "Oh, it's Tuesday. We had, Monday off. It was a holiday." And I'm like, "What's a holiday?" I don't know what that is.
No, it's true. And like, I get very consumed with everything I'm doing. So especially as I started all this, like even the hurdles of just like basic stuff, right? Understanding the technology behind it. And even if somebody else is helping you with that, you got to understand it yourself. It was like, and it still is like, there are not enough hours in the day.
No.
Can we have a 36-hour day, please? Because I would like to sleep at some point.
Yeah, the learning curve is steep too. And I think the benefit of getting into some of this stuff when you're younger is that it's more intuitive, the tech side of things, where I very much came into it later, and I always feel perpetually like a boomer. I mean, I'm on Instagram and I've had somebody else running my Instagram account, and now she hasn't been able to do it and I've had to do it, and I feel like a boomer. Like I don't know how to do. Boomers are better on Instagram than I am, actually. I don't know how to do like basic things on Instagram, and it's just funny to me. I'm like, I should know how to do this, and I don't.
I know how you feel.
And then I'll watch kids make like full feature lengths, TikToks that have a whole beginning, middle, end, and they're well edited and it tells a story and brilliant. So I think that there is that. I've always lived by the proverb, "The work will teach you how to do it," which is what has very much been my story, is just you'll figure it out if you put yourself in the position where it's sink or swim and you have to. And I think that now there's so much opportunity to create what you're doing and find support for it because of places like Locals, which is an amazing place to gather that audience and that energy. Because what I found was I had all this energy on Twitter. I had all this energy from my writing, but it was scattered. And then Locals came along, and it's a place where I can really gather the true people who are my audience and put them kind of in one place, so that at least it segues out from a lot of just the noise that occurs in social media.
Totally. I found the exact same thing, Bridget. So there is a lot of noise in social media. Sometimes you feel like you're getting flooded or bombarded, and it's hard to decipher sort of what's what. There's a lot of negativity and there's a lot of hate, and there's also a lot of shadow banning. Let's be honest. I mean, that's another thing that I really didn't understand until I was out on my own, because that was always somebody else's problem, the organization's problem, but, not my problem. And I'm like, well, wait a second, I can't question whether, we screwed up by, maybe lending money to, and I can say that because we're on locals right now, giving money to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. I can't ask, like, maybe there's some intelligence that we should be like digging into. I couldn't even ask. YouTube dinged me because I said something about our grid. I did a report on our electrical grid, which, by the way, was quoting a whole bunch of congressional testimony, just public stuff that was out there. So look, it's a very hazardous environment for individual small creators like us, Bridget. And so, I'm a big First Amendment believer. I grew up in the live free or die state of New Hampshire, which has just taken on new meaning. In fact, I used to say that all the time, like live free or die is like one of my expressions, because, it's my state, it's my peeps, it's where I grew up. And the social media was like cracking down on that too. So I learned very quickly, like, that you have to be very careful. It is a treacherous landscape out there. And yet then I found locals. And what I've got now is this terrific group of really thoughtful people. I mean, everybody's just been great. They're supportive of me, of course, they're supportive of each other. And it's been this tremendous way for us to exchange ideas. Oftentimes they'll give me ideas for things that I'm going to talk about on the show the very next day. Sometimes I see it there on Locals First, and it's just this committed group of people that have a common interest and a respect for one another that I've just grown to love. And I will say this, like, trying to create these communities on other platforms, some of these bigger platforms where you run the risk of being sort of shadow banned, it's so much harder, because I can remember one time, like, one of my peeps on one of these platforms, one of my followers was trying to share a story about Sarah Huckabee Sanders that was in People magazine about how she was crediting Trump with the vaccine. And this particular company, this was actually Facebook, they were blocking it. And I was like, hey, what's wrong with that story? It's just a People magazine, but it said COVID, it said Sarah Huckabee Sanders, it said Trump, and they're like, boom, done. So that's hard.
It's really, really, I love the word treacherous that you used. It is treacherous. And I'm grateful to see the markets responding with places like Rumble and places like Locals, which was very early into responding to what is clearly something that's getting worse. I see it all the time on my YouTube channel. We do like a stupid satirical comedy show, and we were getting regularly 30,000 per episode, which isn't that many, but it was steady and consistent. And now it's like 15 all across the board, because we started talking about, like, we must have like hit some trigger words, and you can see it. You can see. And I'm like, I'm not powerful enough to outsmart an algorithm. We went from, so it must be interesting for somebody like you who's gone from, I think in any company that you're at, you kind of have to just be diplomatic and watch what you say. People self-censor every day, but then there are things perhaps that you maybe didn't explore because you knew that they were lines you just couldn't necessarily cross when you were working as a journalist. And then you go from that kind of ideological capture that has happened at the high level of many of these institutions. And now it's happened at the tech level. And now you're up against the ideological capture of algorithms. And there's no way around it other than places like Locals, where you can at least ask the question. That's what's so crazy, is that you're worried even right now talking about saying certain words because it might like trip some algorithm. And
but not on
like,
Locals.
Yeah, not on Locals. You don't have to worry about that.
Yeah, or Rumble for that matter.
Rumble's or Rumble
too.
Yep.
Yeah.
So
no, it's really important. I mean, I'll put my sort of business hat on for a second, and I'll just say that I really do fundamentally believe some of these big tech companies have become too big. They really are monopolies. The classic definition of the monopoly, right, is that it's somehow hurting the consumer, costing the consumer more. And so Facebook would say, no, it's not hurting the consumer. We're providing a service. But at what point that service has now become almost a necessity, right? Because this is how people are getting their information about their local communities, about news events, et cetera. And so that's now like becoming far less of just a a sort of, extracurricular in your life, and it's becoming a central part of people's lives. And so in that sense, it's taken on a very monopolistic tone. And I think it's really critical that they get broken up, and there needs to be an antitrust breakup. I think it's, by the way, good for investors. Look at, Ma Bell. AT&T investors would be, pretty sad if it was still Ma Bell. That's part of progress. And at some point that needs to happen. But in the interim, we need places like Locals, like Rumbles, to grow really, really strong, because that's the only way to counteract that sort of big tech narrative, insanity, monopoly type behavior that's going on. I think that is going to be the future, but people have to do their part, right? Like, that's why I'm so proud of all the people that have come to Locals, and all my supporters there, and all my followers, and yours as well, Bridget, because this is people seeking out alternatives.
Yeah.
And it's not always easy to find.
No. And I hear over and over just in the community how grateful they are to have the place where they can vent, because perhaps you and I might be taking more public hits by saying things that other people wish we could say, and our audience responds to that by either supporting or sharing. But I know that a lot of the time I'll hear, thank you for saying what I can't say, because they might just not be in the same circumstances financially where they can risk getting, losing your job. I mean, it's such a crazy landscape right now. It is.
Let me ask you a question. So what is that like as a comedian, right? Like, as somebody who's trying to have sort of a satirical approach on things. I mean, I love like Babylon Bee. I love your show. What is it like, though, trying to navigate? I know what it's like for me as a journalist, right? Because somebody else is deciding what they think is news and what, is fake or whatever they want to call it. You can't have an opinion, but what's it like as a comedian?
It is. It's strange, because I really think a sense of humor is so important just to being a like well-balanced human. And I don't really think that taking yourself seriously, we live in a culture that takes itself incredibly seriously, and it doesn't. And I'm not saying this about any one particular side of the aisle either. There's a lot of pearl clutching going on everywhere at the moment, because everybody is so perpetually aggrieved and offended and like, what, that it is like we're living in a South Park, and people are like, no, because South Park's funny. I'm like, but nobody's laughing in the South Park. They're the characters in South Park aren't laughing. We're laughing at them. And it feels very much like we're in a time for some reason where everybody is, and I think social media adds to this sense of one's own self-importance, and then taking their opinion seriously, and everyone's so identified with their own opinions. And because of just the nature of the landscape that we're in, and then we have these algorithms that actually incentivize that. They encourage us to identify with our opinions and get outraged. And this is why I think places like Locals are so special, because it is not that the incentive is not to dunk on somebody or retweet somebody and have it go, mob somebody. There's no incentive for the people in the community to do that. And so the conversations in my community are much more, people don't take things as seriously. They're much more thoughtful, like you said, and also just kind and compassionate, and people really trying to hear one another's perspective.
Yeah.
But yeah, as a comedian, it's been really weird. It's been a very strange time, and a lot of it has happened very quickly.
Yeah, no, I think what you're saying about the South Park episode is just classic. Like, that's so good, because you do see this all the time, like on both sides. And the fact that people weren't able to get together for holidays and families, I'm like, oh my gosh, like,
life is so
if
much
you
bigger.
take it that seriously, like where are we heading? Like, by the way, I did this for a living. Like, I'm analyzing news and analyzing opinions, and I have an opinion, but by the way, I don't hold it against you if you have a different opinion.
No.
You also, Bridget, as a comedian, like, need to be able to see the humor in all sides. And when people don't see all sides, that's actually really dangerous to our society.
It's so strange that both sides has become a bad word, that this is like a term where you're like, oh, you're both sidesing things. And I don't see that as anything that's good. And as a comedian, I always say, don't defend the material. Like, defend your right to be hyperbolic, because that's the hill I will die on is to say stupid, outrageous stuff. That's what you're supposed to do as a comedian, is say the things that are outrageous or maybe go a little bit over the line just to give people that relief. They're laughing because they relate on some level.
Yeah.
And if you take that away, that's why it's such a weird time, because everybody does seem to have like the it seems like there's tons of outrage and people are overly outraged all the time, and yet no one has any tolerance for hyperbole either. So it's a very strange paradox where they're allowed to be completely outrageous and hyperbolic and kind of insane in some ways, but they won't allow that of other people, in particular comedians. And it is a weird time when comedians are being held to some higher standard than our own politicians. That's weird too.
I think social media is a big part of it. And I think that you're right. It's the algorithms that have sort of caused people to get angrier and angrier. And this is why we need sort of a refuge in a place like Locals. And I don't care, what by the way, we have lots of different people on there from lots of different spheres. And, Tulsi Gabbard,
Russell Brand,
to you, a comedian, myself, I mean, just a really interesting, I think, group of people from many different viewpoints and many different perspectives. And it's like, look, this is a place where you can come and appreciate perspective and appreciate thought. I mean, the idea that you can't see certain things. I got to tell you, I have some friends that grew up in the USSR, and the commonality is that none of them trust the government. Right. And the reason they don't trust the government is because the government was always trying to spin something or, spoon something into, their heads. And you look now, there was a study that we did this actually on the show today. The CDC apparently won't publish the results yet of the 18 to 49-year-old booster effectiveness. Now, it's like, guys, you're holding information back.
Yeah.
Why? Because you're afraid of how we might interpret it. It's just going too far, because they have an agenda, they have a viewpoint. And what do we become as a society when it's only one side, one group that's controlling the narrative? That's a very slippery slope. It's dangerous. I'm psyched that, all the people that are there on the Locals platform, the investors behind it, this is what is needed. And the same with Rumble.
Yeah.
A counter to the other stuff.
Yeah. I mean, my biggest fear is that parallel networks will spring up and then we'll be in our own little silos, because it seems sometimes I'm in the optimistic, maybe this isn't the path, because it seems like these parallel networks are going to exist where you just have parallel internets basically. And that is my biggest fear. But I think that places like Locals are so powerful because they do hold space for people across the whole political spectrum. It doesn't matter. And as long as these places exist and that's their core value, is having a diversity of ideas and thought on the platform, then we're still not quite in the, there's two internets that are essentially living side by side.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. That's a good point. I think you're right. I mean, the bottom line is you just want diversity of thought, diversity of opinion, and ability to, dig in and examine issues and make fun of issues and protect that First Amendment, which is our First Amendment. Let's not forget. So it's important. It's kind of, it's a wild time. It's really a wild time. It's a very, very, very strange time. And we're kind of all on the front lines of history here.
I know it feels like we're in the Wild West when they were home, setting up their homesteads and land. It just feels very much, a lot of the time, that's what Locals feels like to me. It's like a digital while, we're kind of homesteading, all right, we're out here in the wilderness, not really belonging in this other place and in this new place, and trying to set up some kind of community. And I like it. I'm glad to be a part of it, and I'm glad that you're a part of it.
Thanks, Bridget. I'm thrilled to be a part of it. I keep pushing it on every platform because, again, I know that this is a space that has the right intentions, and the right focus, and it can only grow from here. So I think there's great things ahead. We need this in our society right now. So it's something I'm so proud to be part of, and I just can't tell people enough good about. So thanks for having me on this too.
Coming. Where can we find you and your show and all the things in your locals?
Yes. So on locals, I'm trishregan.locals.com. My show is the Trish Regan Show, which I post actually on locals. So if you're on locals, you'll get it there, but also on Apple iTunes or on Spotify. And I'm on the usual suspects as well: YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. But again, there's a specialness to locals that I just want to encourage everybody to go there. But I'm everywhere. I'm everywhere you can find me. And then of course my website, which is trishintel.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time.
You
Appreciate
bet.
you.
Thanks, Bridget.